Video looks
Yes,
good.
hi, everybody.
Good. And Mayor Tarter, do you want to do an audio check?
No, I don't want to do one. So we're trying to see if I can see all the participants to see if people's hands are up. We're having a little difficulty with that. I mean, I guess we can ultimately get started, but I may not be able to see you if your hands are up. So if so, just bear with me maybe. Looks like Dave, do you have your hand up?
I do, yeah, thanks.
Okay. It's not showing me the list of participants, and I just have a few people on the screen, and plus 7 somewhere else. So, what's that?
Yeah, blinking. You see the Outlook.
This?
Yeah.
That's just reminders. Yeah. Should I re-enter this thing, or just let it be?
You can relaunch meeting if you want, but I'm not sure if it will start showing it.
What do you recommend then?
Yeah, leave and rejoin.
All right, I'm going to leave this meeting briefly and come back in, see if I can get this issue cleared up. So.
So for those watching, we are waiting for the mayor to re-log in, and then we will start the meeting.
The one that we tried before, it was desktop.
Yeah, so this is, let's see if I can get the people. I'm going to go with it, yeah.
Continue use, yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Cindy, we ready to go?
Yes, we are, and hold on, we're getting an echo in here. Okay, I think the echo is gone, so I will start with reading the virtual notice and then do the roll call for you, Mayor. This meeting, for which the agenda has been posted, will be held pursuant to and compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and federal local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operations during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council and other boards will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and members of the public can view the meeting at www.fallschurchva.gov/councilmeetings, as well as on FCC TV channels Cox 11, RZN 2, and Verizon 35. City Council work sessions are conducted to allow council members the opportunity to discuss upcoming legislation and policy issues, and the public is generally not invited to speak. Public comment may be sent to cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. All comments are provided in full to the members of council and will be summarized at the next City Council meeting. For roll call, Ms. Connolly?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Mr. Duncan just texted that he has a family emergency and he'll be on shortly.
Thank you. Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Sean Siscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here,
Mayor Tarter?
Here.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And I noticed a few people don't have their computers muted. Just suggest if you're not speaking, if you could do so to avoid technical issues, particularly feedback and echoing, that would be probably a good idea. But everyone, welcome to the June 6th, Monday, June 6th, 2022 work session, the Falls Church City Council. We do have some items on the agenda and some closed session items as well. But why don't we go ahead and get started? with our work session items. And I don't know, Mr. Shields, with respect to this first item, are you handling this or someone from staff going to take care of the?
Well, thank you, Mayor. It'll be a team effort. And but if I could just make a few introductory comments, and then I'll turn it over to Dana Lewis, and she'll lead our staff presentation on this. This has been a joint effort with Cindy and Dana, and more recently with the city attorney reviewing all of the documents. So the request tonight, we have 3 items relating to affordable housing. The first 2 are kind of related to each other or tied together. And so the first of those 2 is conveyance of 208 South Gibson Street to the Economic Development Authority to facilitate the financing through a Virginia housing loan of all 5 properties now that the city, through the EDA, owns in the Virginia Village area. And then following behind that is a review of the major terms and concepts behind a memorandum of understanding with Wesley Housing Development Corporation, which would be using year 3 Amazon Reach Affordable Housing Rental Preservation Grant Funds, the amount of $3.7 million to manage and operate those properties, and also facilitate the acquisition of additional properties in the Virginia Village area, and then ultimately, looking down the road, facilitate the potential redevelopment of those properties for the purposes of affordable housing. And then lastly, we would then shift to the year 2 Amazon Reach program grant for the city, which is focused on home ownership. So for these, the one item that we're asking for council action on at your next meeting on June 13th is the conveyance of 208 South Gibson Street to the Economic Development Authority. So the request there is to refer that to the Planning Commission for its mandatory recommendation, and then have that to come back to City Council for ultimate action later this month. The other 2 are in the nature of updates, and the request there is to get council feedback, and we would schedule those for the meeting of June 27th for final consideration. In your staff report, the NHP item request for consideration on June 13th. We think that it would be good to take a little bit of additional time for both the MOU with Wesley and the NHP agreement. Right now we're taking the concepts that have been discussed and turning those into binding agreements. There are red lines for those agreements going back and forth now between the attorneys, and we want to make sure that that is given enough time to be done properly. So I want to thank Carol McCoskries for her work on those items, which is ongoing. So that's an introduction. And if I also, before I turn it over to Dana, if I could make 2 announcements on the staffing side, one which is one that we're sad about, and one which is a very happy bit of news. And the first is Alicia Garcia, who you all met, and the last time the council discussed these items, as our housing development specialist for the city. She has had to tender her resignation due to a family issue that she's dealing with, and we're hopeful possibly that will get resolved, and we would love to welcome her back if that's possible. But at the moment, she is not available to us to carry this work forward. So Cindy and Dana, working now with Carol, have been really working very hard to advance these items. The Wesley item has been going through a working group with the EDA and members of City Council, and we'll talk about that process. And so that's how that work has been going forward. And the NHP has really been going forward just with Dana in coordination with other members of staff and in coordination with the Housing Commission. Now, on the positive side, I want to just congratulate Dana. She's going to be married this week, and so the next time, this is the last meeting which we'll see Dana Lewis, and when she comes back, she'll be Dana Jones. So congratulations to Greg Jones and to and to Dana. I know this is a very big week, and really appreciate the fact that you have that going on while we have these really important affordable housing items going forward. So I just wanted to note that as we get started in our meeting. So with that, then, let me turn it over to Dana. I think she's got a few slides just to help us walk through these items. And we'll take the first two to discuss those and then have questions, answer council direction on those, and then we'll shift to item 1C, which is the NHP agreement. So that's the end of my introduction. Let me turn it over to Ms. Lewis.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, council. First thing I wanted to say is I'm not sure who Greg Jones is, but I'm marrying James Jones. And since this is being recorded,
Dana,
I
I'm
just
sorry.
wanted to make sure. I'm sure he's a nice guy.
Yeah, congratulations to James Jones.
Thank you.
I beg your pardon.
I don't want to get in trouble. So I wanted to start this evening, and we're going to talk about the Amazon Virginia Reach grants. And so we have 3 items actually to discuss with you, but the first one is Amazon 3 and 5, the acquisition strike fund. So what the requested council action tonight is that we're asking you to approve and forward the conveyance of 2028 Maple, the property 208 Maple to the EDA, and to approve the MOU with Wesley Housing. And then the second order of business has to do with Amazon 2, and that's the homeownership and covenant extension. Your requested council action is approval for the June 27th meeting. And we'll be reviewing again the homeownership developer agreement with NHPF because we've been doing a lot of work with that and, updating roles and responsibilities and that type of thing. We can go to our next slide. So the first one is the conveyance of 28 Gibson, the property, and we want to convey that. And so currently the city owns 28 Gibson, 208 Gibson, and we have since 2008 is when we originally purchased it. Since that time, in the last 2 years, the EDA has acquired 302, 310, 312 Shirley Street, and in the past year, we just acquired 310 South Maple. And so the EDA, who's actually the owner of those, the 4 properties that I just mentioned, is applying for Virginia housing financing. And so the purpose of this financing is that the EDA and the city both want to be paid back with loan proceeds. And so that's what we're hoping will happen. And so, when we talked to Virginia Housing, they recommended that we convey 208 so that we can do one transaction with all 5 properties, one loan application, and that will save us money on the transaction because it will, as far as the loan and closing costs, will be much less if we do that. So the loan underwriting is scheduled for July 7th, 2022, and the loan closing will be August 5th, 2022. And as I mentioned before, the whole goal of this is so that the Economic Development Authority and the city be paid back by the loan proceeds. And we've been working with Virginia Housing with this for a long time to try to get all the details squared away for this. So I can go to the next slide. If you go to the next slide, I just wanted to show you the properties that we're talking about. So the one that we purchased in 2008 is 208. That's on the corner of Gibson and Shirley. Then the next property that we purchased was 302 Shirley Street. Then after that, we purchased 310 and 312 that are down at that corner. And then our most recent purchase is 310 South Maple. And just as an update, the RFQ for 310 South Maple closes tomorrow. So we're hoping to get some bids to do the work, the rehab work that needs to happen at 310 South Maple. So we'll have an update on that this week. Move to the next slide. So any questions about the first one before I go to Wesley Housing, the Wesley Housing MOU?
Letty?
Dana, early congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Can you share with council, because I think you've shared with the working group, but the terms of the refi, because I think we were fortunate in being able to work with Virginia Housing and getting some really good terms. Are those finalized, and can we share that just so people know what the refinancing details are?
Should I have that?
Dana, would you like me to take that?
Yes, please, because I'm looking for my notes here.
Sure. So the basic terms, and we are still finishing underwriting, but the interest rate is 2.25, which is very good. And this is acquire and hold, so they are reducing the standard conditions of the building. So we'll be doing building safety and building code compliance. The term of the loan is 7 years with extension interest only. So that's the core. And then the loan proceeds will pay back the EDA for 302 Shirley, that purchase, and the city council capital reserves for the 310 and 312 Shirley purchases.
And Cindy, are we leaving any money in, or does everyone get all their money back?
That will be the cash back. That was the commitment for the loan proceeds, the equity of 208 Gibson, which has been fully paid off, and the ARPA funds for 310 South Maple stay in the project as part of the city's equity for future redevelopment.
Any other questions?
Let's keep going.
Okay, so let's move on to the Wesley Housing MOU, if we could bring that up. Okay, so the purpose of the Wesley Housing MOU is, the whole purpose of, basically all of the Amazon projects is to preserve affordable housing in the city. And then with this project, we not only want to preserve affordable housing, but we also want to acquire additional units and maintain affordability. And then eventually, sometime down the road, we want to do redevelopment. We're hoping maybe within the next 10 years. And so that's what we're trying to achieve with this Wesley Housing MOU and working with them as our nonprofit partner. So the core concepts of the MOU that we're working with, we have a really good group. It's an affordable housing work group that we established. We've had maybe about 6 meetings. We have representatives from council, the EDA, Wesley Housing is there, the economic development in the city is there, housing staff. We have a really good group. Everyone's there. We have met regularly, and we have been going through all the terms, getting feedback. We had an early draft, and that has completely changed based on feedback from the group. And we've gone through many drafts, and through all those meetings and all those drafts, we've come to consensus on the core terms. And everybody had really good feedback. And so we had developers on that group, and I think we've really come to a good place on those core terms. So as I talked about, there's 3 goals that we're trying to achieve with this project. And the first phase of the project, of the MOU, and what it talks about is maintaining and operating the Virginia Village properties that I just showed you. So the Wesley Housing is going to be the operator of the program until the ownership transfers. Currently, the city is not allowed to serve as operator, but we have a contract with Promax, and we would really like to pass that on to Wesley, because the way it's currently set up, the city spends a lot of time working with Promax, approving invoices, and it just takes a lot of time. Wesley has a lot of experience in this area. This is what they do. So we're hoping that we'll be able to pass that to them. And the first phase also maintains affordability on the properties and offers the city the right to reclaim. No current tenants are displaced, and any homes that that become available will be leased to households under 60% AMI. And the good thing is that they will manage the leasing process. So the city, we might share our waiting list with them, but they're going to be the ones that manage the whole lease up, determine the eligibility, all that kind of stuff. All we do is put people on the list that call us that are interested in renting. There'll be a management fee of 7% that they will charge to conduct these services. And they will do quarterly reporting and submit an annual budget to us. We can go to the second phase. So the second phase is assemblage of the properties. And this is where the acquisition strike fund comes in. So in this phase, the owner, which we are assuming would be Wesley, would purchase the properties and hold them utilizing the acquisition strike funds. That's our Amazon grant funds and ARPA funding that we have going towards this project. And then what we envision, and we spend a lot of time in our group talking about how we want them to be proactive to go out to seek to purchase these properties, because we can't wait for them to come on the market, and we need to be prepared when they do. And it's just through luck that we were able to get the last couple of properties. So we want them to be proactive and do a strategic plan in order to go out and purchase these properties. And then we will use the Virginia Housing Finance that we already have our agreement with to finance the existing we'll use the financing that we're applying for now to finance the existing 5 buildings and use our grant funds for future acquisitions. So the third phase is redevelopment. And so that's once we have made all the purchases and we have the units that we want to have, then we're going to look at redeveloping these properties that we have. We will collaborate, and that collaboration will include Wesley Housing, the Economic Development Authority, City Council, Housing Commission. We talked about having, community work groups and getting community input, and just involving a variety of different stakeholders. And we'll develop a strategic development plan that includes phasing, design, the incomes, uses of the structure, land uses, and financing. And then the MOU, we built into the MOU a separation clause so that either party can, if we can't seek consensus on what the redevelopment is going to be, then either party can divorce at that time. And so I think Wyatt had wanted to do the first 2. So are there any questions about the MOU at this point? And what we have provided for you is a draft. So we are, our whole goal tonight is to get feedback from you all so that, we can add that to the draft. I did just want to remind you, we've had extensive, work on it with our group, and we've also done some restructuring to kind of make it more easier to understand.
We have a question.
Okay.
Excuse me? I've got some feedback too. If whoever's got unmuted, or I would suggest maybe muting up unless you're going to be speaking. But our first question comes from Caroline Leon.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Dana, on phase 1, can you clarify for me, the 7% is against what? Is it gross monthly rent per unit?
Just a minute. You're saying when they're doing the operation?
Yeah. Cindy, it might help to flip to first phase again. Oh, management fee is 7%.
Yes, it's 7% of the gross rent.
Okay.
And I would note it also includes all of their tenant services. They're not charging an extra fee for the financial and tenant support services they provide for all their tenants.
You know, I really applaud Wesley for this because normally what I see from my experience and looking at the multifamily side of Freddie Mac is that, you know, the management fee is from 8 to 12%. So I really appreciate Wesley putting forth a very mission partnership oriented kind of percentage on that. And that's kind of lower than what I'm used to, about 1%. So I just wanted everybody to be aware of that. It's a kind number.
Mary Beth Connolly?
Thanks, Mayor Charter. My question is, I think, about slide number 8. Can you switch to that one? Oh, no, it was actually 7. So it relates to the waiting list.
Yes.
You're having no current tenants displaced, and then you mentioned that if people are interested in these buildings, renting these, they could get on the waiting list. Is this the same waiting list that they would be on if they were trying to get into one of our ADUs in a mixed-use building? Is that process?
It'll be the same.
How does that work? Or have you not figured that out yet?
It'll be the same waiting list. We currently use the same waiting list. You know, we have had vacancies at our Virginia Village units in the past, like in the past 2 years, use the same persons that are on our waiting list, our ADU waiting list for those properties. You know, and even though, I mean, we're competing against newer units, at the newer units, you have to pay for parking, and at Virginia Village, you do not. So that is a big plus for a lot of persons. And, you know, so, yeah, we'll be using the same waiting list.
Okay.
That's how we envision.
And the same
Thank you.
prioritization as well.
Same prioritizations. So if you live or work in the city, you're going to have a higher prioritization. And we do have seniors and persons with disabilities would be priority 1, but these units are not really senior friendly because they have stairs. So we found that a lot of seniors are interested in.
And I guess the mixed use really don't have households under 60% AMI.
Actually, so the city has a city committed affordable unit program. We have 3 units which can go up to 50% of AMI. And some of those folks are like at 40, but we only have, I mean, council was kind enough to authorize 2 additional, you know, we subsidize the rent above, you know, up to 60%. And we added 2 additional units in 2020. So we have 3 units like that. But that's all we have.
So then this waiting list is just the people in Virginia Village and those 3 units.
No, the waiting list will be anybody on our waiting list that is at 60, that, you know, is looking for a unit that is eligible up to 60% of AMI is eligible for this property. Anyone on our waiting list. We have ADUs that range from like 50% AMI all the way up to 100% AMI. So anybody that qualifies that's on that 60% AMI list would qualify for this unit.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? So it says under 60% AMI, just following up on Mary Beth's train of thought. So what is the maximum AMI here?
Hold on, I can tell you that in just a second.
And while Dana's looking up the exact number, it's 60% or below. So if somebody was right at the 60%, they'd still qualify.
Got it. So it's including, up to and including 60% AMI. Caroline?
And just to answer your question, for a 1-bedroom, so that would be a person at 59, they could go up to $60,000 basically, and their rent would be $1,494. And we have units at 60% of AMI at Founders Road, Northgate, Pearson Square, Tenor Hill, West Broad, and Virginia Village.
Okay. Thank you. So we have some additional questions. We've got a new person here. Before I go to Caroline and Letty, let's go to Dave, who hasn't spoken yet. Dave?
Sure. Just two questions really for Carol and for Dana. Ownership, is it clear who will own these properties, and explain that again, and any potential liability for either loss to the property or damage or personal injury to anyone else?
So the ownership would be with Wesley Housing. And I'm going to let Cindy talk about, because she's handling the insurance piece. I'm going to let her answer that.
Sure. So currently, of course, the city owns these properties and/or the EDAs. So under the city's insurance, we're carrying all building, property, general liability coverage on them. The tenants do carry rental insurance for their own personal properties. With the transfer of ownership as planned to Wesley, under the MOU, then Wesley takes over and carries their ownership, and we'd have additional assurance back to us.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Caroline?
Sorry, slow to unmute. Well, just one question. When I take a look at this MOU on line number 80, it just struck me that we have them meaning Wesley, an annual operating budget by October 1st of each year that provides the estimates and the forecast of a P&L for the next year. Is there any reason why we chose October versus just lining up with our fiscal year July to July? Is there a benefit to rethinking the October 1st date to align it with the fiscal year start that we are under?
I think we did it per their Wesley operates on a calendar year versus a fiscal year, so that was a recommendation from
Okay.
Wesley.
Okay.
I'm not
missed
sure
that.
it's hard and fast, so we could relook at that.
Just thanks for explaining the process. As long as from our perspective that it allows us the time to deal with the loss, right? The conservative scenario, and how to absorb that and manage that as part of our cycle. I think that would be the one question of if staff is thought through that and is okay with October 1st.
Letty?
Thank you. Just a couple of general kind of suggestions or requests. So overall, I'm really comfortable with kind of where we are with Wesley. So I think just a note for the rest of council, I really appreciate Cindy's work in pulling together the working group. I think that was a really effective model in getting into the details, because we did spend a lot of time on this. And so this is not the first time we've seen this. So I'm largely comfortable with this. And again, want to thank Cindy. What I suggest, so given that council's role in this is really just conveying 208 South Gibson to the EDA, and that council's really not having a role in the refinancing other than waiting obviously for the repayment. What might be helpful to memorialize somewhere is some sort of ledger that kind of recounts, here's how much we spent on these 5 units going back to since 2008, between acquisition costs, repair, monthly payments. Here's how much EDA's put in, here's how much we put in, here's the ARPA funds, here are reserve funds. And here's what we're getting back out. And so, Cindy, what you mentioned earlier, that we're keeping 208 Gibson, the ARPA dollars, and then the 310 South Maple. I don't see that somewhere in the staff report. Maybe I just missed it, but I feel like we need to kind of have a good summary of all these transactions and the amount of money we've spent, so that we're very clear, because at the end of the day, it's all taxpayer money. And while we're doing really good work, I think that ledger would be really helpful for transparency, because obviously there's 5 units and there's lots that's happened. Second concern, which I think speaks to probably what Dave Snyder was talking about, is, and I think where we've landed, I'm in a comfortable place, but again, probably would be good to speak to the other 5 members of council that weren't in all these working group discussions, is around the risk side. Given that it will take us some time to acquire and consolidate and come up with a redevelopment plan, and who knows where we'll be in maybe 10 years. I think it would be helpful for Cindy and Dana maybe to talk a bit about kind of what's the out. So how is the city getting protected in the event interests change, our interests don't align, we don't think they're the right redevelopment partner. I think right now, as Caroline indicated, I feel like Wesley has been a really good, honest broker here with us. And I feel good about the partnership right now, but who can predict the future? So can you all talk a bit about kind of how the city's protected on that divorce, should we need that, and the possibility of even bringing in a fourth party or even mixed use in the language in the MOU? I want to make sure that the rest of council knows that that is in there, and that was something that was a big theme of the working group discussions. So 2 general kind of comments, feedback, suggestions before this is up for a vote by us next week, and the EDA before the refinancing.
Sure. For the first one, in terms of documenting the financial piece, we certainly can do that, and that will be easier to do once we finish the underwriting and have the final loan proceeds. But right now, the amount of money that's left as equity is estimated at $1.4 million. So just for a point of reference, but the suggestion is good, and we can follow up on that documentation. And then for the sort of the divorce, as Dana referred to it, in the draft MOU, starting at line 324, there's a reclaim option, and that's if Wesley determines it's no longer going to operate. They'll give reasonable notice to the city, and then we have the option and obligation to repurchase the parcels, and that would be set as the amount of debt remaining on the properties. So whatever's left, for example, on these loan proceeds, and when we purchase additional units for consolidation, once we have a couple of those new buildings, we'll finance those with Virginia Housing as well to bring money back into the revolving fund to buy the next round. So there could be loan proceeds remaining, or outstanding loans remaining on the new purchases. So that's one option, is where Wesley initiates getting out. The other one at line 331, and this built off of council's suggestions when we talked about this earlier, is if we can't come to an agreement on what does that redevelopment plan look like, and maybe it's because it's not 100% affordable, and that's Wesley's mission, or the way we're phasing it, or whatever, for whatever reason. We're not anticipating it, but we're allowing for full protection and risk mitigation. Then we can then sever the relationship, and then once again we'd have the obligation to repurchase for the outstanding balances. So those are the two at a high level, the outs, and then we have built into the framework for the redevelopment, working collaboratively on the community charrette to build the strategic plan, as Dana was mentioning earlier. And just because I have the MOU in front of me, looking at general conditions starting on line 346 and then going down to 368 is where we specified the insurance that Wesley will carry as owner, and then there will also, under the operating agreement, also, while we may be still carrying our own insurance, they will carry their own professional general liability for their staff and workers' comp while they're operating. That'll be part of the operating agreement. So I'll just go back a little bit to Mr. Snyder's question. Hopefully that was responsive to the highlights that you wanted, Ms. Hardy.
Yep, thank you. I just want to make sure that the other 5 members heard all that too.
All right, thank you. Other questions or comments? So let me ask about, you talked about a good interest rate, 2 and whatever percent, I can't recall. How does that impact us? Like, in other words, Wesley's going to own this, aren't they? Aren't they going to be carrying that debt, or how does the debt impact us?
Once we transfer the ownership to Wesley, they will be carrying that. But the way we got to the loan proceeds was how much the properties can carry in debt based on the rental income. So by having that lower interest rate, we were able to achieve the loan proceeds payback for the EDA and the council, and still maintaining them at 60%. Any other loan product that we looked at, which was usually double, wouldn't allow the finances and the deals to actually work. So we're very fortunate with Virginia Housing's REACH money of a guarantee of the 2.25%.
Okay.
Cindy, if I can jump in, because this was another point we discussed, is I think if the interest rate were higher, essentially the properties would all be cash flow negative in order to keep it at 60%. But I think one thing that we did negotiate, and I think it's still in the MOU, is that if there were operating losses, Wesley would cover that. And so the city is not liable for any of that.
That is true. That's very accurate and a good point to highlight. The city is looking to bring ARPA or CDBG to the table for capital, but any negative cash flows on the operating side, once Wesley owns these, is the responsibility of Wesley to absorb and address.
Got it. All right, thank you. Other questions or comments? Carol, do you have anything to add about this and just your continuing review and input, not just on this, but all of these matters?
No, we are continuing to work on this, and I have, just because this is a lot of complicated things to really get on top of it once I've got somebody outside who does some commercial real estate helping me with some of this. I mean, I think that, to me, one of the big issues on the Wesley Housing is simply that because it's an interest-only loan with the payment due at the conclusion, that debt will remain out there and have to be dealt with at the end of the of whatever we do, either a redevelopment, or if the city gets the properties back, they would come back subject to still the balloon payment of the amounts of the loan.
Got it. That's 7 years, correct?
7
Yeah,
years with
there's a
the option
possible-
to extend.
Yeah, there's a possible 3-year extension to the 10-year term.
Got
So
it.
if we redevelop, then that would roll into the long-term financing of the deal. If we separate and divorce, then yes, the balloon payment would be part of the outstanding loans to repurchase.
Got it. Okay. Other questions or comments from anyone? All right. Well, why don't we keep on moving? Mr. Shields, you want to take us to the next item?
So we'll now shift to a update on the discussions with NHP on the home ownership program, and I'll turn this back to Ms. Lewis for a briefing for the City Council. And again, this one is in discussions today, really kind of with the ongoing back and forth with NHP on this item. We're recommending that this be back for consideration from the City Council on the 27th of June. Ms. Lewis?
Okay, last one. So this is the Amazon home ownership program that we discussed in the past. So we're just here to kind of give a brief overview and let you know that we're still working on it. Basically, our roles and responsibilities and that type of thing, and legal review is happening. So just, for historical, we have $3.4 million in grant funding. We're hoping to have up to 18 home ownership opportunities. That's all going to kind of depend on housing prices that are going up and interest rates. We're looking at a 99-year affordability covenant on each property, 75-25 split in equity. That's down from 80-20. And that will be with the homeowner and city at resale or financing. And it will be, the funds will be revolving over time. And we have reduced the developer fee to 11%. And so this is just kind of a, optic of how the program works. So if you go through the dates, so if you go down to Homeownership Waitlist, so HHS staff is going to work with NHP to reach out to residents on the wait list. Currently, we're at 19 residents on the wait list, and we're going to prepare them for, prepare the prospective buyers. And this will include registering residents in the first-time home buyer classes and getting qualified for a mortgage. And you guys have an email from a city employee who's really excited about the program. And so they will have to take a VHDA, a Virginia Housing home ownership class, because a lot of these have never even thought about purchasing a home before, are not really aware of what all goes into it and how to get, they're going to have to go to credit counseling classes. They'll have to use a Virginia Housing approved lender and all of that. So it'll be a really good experience for them. And our housing specialist is going through all of these classes right now to have an idea of how they work. So NHP and the city will work together on that piece. Then NHP will purchase homes for the program. So they're working with the realtor right now to kind of see what would meet within the price range that Virginia Housing has set out. NHP will hold the home until a home buyer in the appropriate income range is ready to purchase the home. And NHP will cover all the holding cost expenses, however long it takes, until the buyer is ready to purchase. After that, rehab work will happen. NHP will coordinate and manage the required rehab work to the home. We're estimating it'll be about $20,000 per home. It'll be things like, replacing fixtures, plumbing, all of those type of things that may be necessary. The next step is after the rehab has happened, NHP will work with the qualified buyer to purchase the home. And then at the time of purchase, deed restrictions will be in place for the home so that it remains affordable for 99 years. After the buyer has been in the home for quite some time, we don't know when they'll resell, but at the time of resale, the homeowner will sell to a buyer in the same AMI bracket, and it'll be, the city will still have a homeownership waitlist at that time. And I just want to add here that in 2023, the 8 units, homeownership units that we have at the spectrum are going to expire. So in 2023, the city will only have 5 homeownership ADUs left. And so this is really critical that we get these units on board, and that, so we have these units in the future for people to buy. And at sale, the seller will keep, that should be changed to 75% of the sales proceeds, and the city will receive 25% of the sale proceeds. And that was based on feedback from our last council meeting. And then in December 23, when the grant ends, the process will recycle until the grant funds are expended by December 31st, 2023, unless an extension is requested. So that's how the program works. That's how we're envisioning it. So NHP will have roles and the city will have roles. So the NHP is going to do the majority of work here as far as, the purchasing, the rehab. They're going to be working with the tenants. We're going to forward them the tenants, but they're going to do that majority of work of, sending them where they need to go and, doing the purchase, all those things. The city roles is that we have a wait list and we will help do outreach for the program. And we also have a relationship with Virginia Housing, and we know how that homeownership class works. We have a relationship with the credit counselor, which is in Arlington, that will serve city residents that we can make referrals to, because we already send residents to them, people that are trying to get their credit scores up, we send them to them. So we already have that relationship, and so that's where we fit in. The outreach, city will do outreach, and NHP will assist in that. NHP will work with the referred residents. NHP will proactively go out and find the properties. They will do the purchase and rehabilitation, and then they will do the restrictive covenants, draft them, and file them. So just wanted to add that. And then, as I mentioned, key updates to the terms that have been made since the last time we came before you is that the shared equity has been updated to a 75-25 split, and the developer fee was reduced to 11%. And we did share this amount with, we just got additional feedback from Virginia Housing on the fee, and they were in, they concurred that the rate was reasonable with the rate. So the timeline for all 3 of these projects is June 13th. which is next Monday. We want to refer the 208 Gibson conveyance to the Planning Commission. And then June 27th, we're hoping to approve the 208 Gibson conveyance, approve the Amazon 3-5 MOU with Wesley Housing, and approve the Amazon 2 NHP developer agreement. Any questions? I was whizzing through that.
And I would just note the Planning Commission is meeting June 15th, so the timing of June 13th is important to highlight.
Okay, we do have some questions. Caroline?
Yeah, thank you, Dana and team. So I want to reiterate concern around an 11% developer fee. It's not acceptable, especially when I take a look at the costs that were shared and what was embedded in that. Project executive at $429,000 a year, an assistant project manager at $156,000. You know, just these loaded, and for a nonprofit, they actually have included 10% profit and 10% overhead, which means 20% on top of their direct costs. So my ask for this is simply to go back and push them and ask for 7%. Go on the other extreme, negotiate hard, because 11% is not, it's not ideal in the sense that if we're expecting to get 18 properties, I don't think that's a realistic expectation to paint for the public or for council, given such a high high rate for the fee and the carry cost. I think we're looking at 3.4 minus 1.2 is the numbers that I'm hearing, which I think at that remaining amount, I think we're lucky if we get half of 18 or 9 units. So I'm looking for preservation as much as possible of our original intent on this, which is to give the city as much of an opportunity to get as much affordable housing stock as we can possibly get. When I take a look at Wesley and their proposal to do a development fee of 7%, it is a stark contrast with what NHP has come back with. For the shared equity piece, I do appreciate the 25-75% split. You know, I tend to be a little bit more conservative on this to cover the side of the city where I think we unrealistic to probably expect to cover as much cost as we can up front. But I'd ask that you consider a 70-30 split, right? Where you even increase this up from 25 to 30%. For first time out going into this, I think if we are more open to a scalar approach where we, you know, increase the equity to the prospective resident through time, I think we can have more give, but at the beginning, just a little bit more conservative, particularly on the first two purchases, so that we have language in our contract to flex on that shared equity deal is perhaps, you know, what I'm looking for. So I'd challenge to see if it's really 75-25 or is it really 7-30? Yeah, so I'll pause at that for now. But thank you.
Thank you. Letty?
Thank you. So like Caroline, I remain concerned about how much money is going towards their fees. So while it's good that we got from 12% to 11%, the new kind of clause in there that I maybe perhaps did not notice before is a $1.2 million cap of the total developer fees. So again, the concept of a cap is good, but 1.2 million is like 30% of the total grant. And that just feels extraordinarily high when I think all of us would love to see more of the money go towards actual housings. And so, I mean, $2 million realistically buys us like 5 units these days. So that I'm concerned about that. So like Caroline, if we can push further on that. The second, which I brought up in probably several work sessions as well as in Housing Commission meeting, is really the realtor involvement. And I'd love to see more meat on that, because I think this program only works if we don't compete on the open market for units. And so getting realtors involved early to figure out who might be willing to sell to the city before it's out there, before we have to competitively bid, that's really important. And I think when I've raised this before, NHP says, well, we don't have to pay for that because normally the seller pays the fees. But because we're asking realtors to do that extra work of finding those units and housing that's not yet on the market, I think that's extra fees that sellers probably usually don't pay. So that just needs to be better fleshed out, because I think without that realtor involvement, I have a hard time seeing how this would work well. Third concern, I think, is really around making sure, again, the legal review. It sounds like Carol is going to spend more time on this in the next couple of weeks, but this one, because we haven't had that working group model, I feel just less comfortable with. And so I just asked that Carol spend some time thinking through this with us. So those are the top three ones. But really, I think on the cost side, just spending 30% of the total grant money just seems extraordinarily high. And I'd love to see more of that go towards actual home ownership.
Debbie?
Yes, I think Caroline and Lydia have both outlined several of my areas of concern. I really defer to Caroline's expertise in terms of what the market is for management fees, since this is her bailiwick as well. But just that gut check of having almost 30% of a grant spent on management fees is, that seems just instinctively high. But again, I defer to those who have more expertise in this particular area of the market. And one thing that most of us in the city do have a lot of experience with is the difficulty of finding housing. I'm sure many of us get letters from people asking, like, are you going to sell your home? When are you going to sell your home? Do you know anybody's going to sell your home? I get cold calls for that. So I have some desire to have someone who knows the market really well to be looking out for us at the front end. I don't think we're going to just be lucky to find them or have someone else bring them to them if they don't have expertise in Falls Church City real estate. And then lastly, of course, just deferring to Carol's input as well. So not really adding anything new, but echoing some of those sentiments. Thank you.
And I am, today I was mostly looking at.
You're on mute.
Carol.
Sorry. Today I was mostly working on the NHPF one, but I will be turning more attention to this Wesley agreement and take a hard look at that.
Mary Beth?
Yeah, I'll just be the fourth voice there with Caroline, Letty, and Debbie, that I share a lot of their concerns. And I think Caroline mentioned the salary listing on the last document of what people are being paid out of those fees. And I'm just wondering, is that a one-year payment? Is that over the course? It seems like a lot of money per hour and a lot of people assigned to do this. So that's a detail that you don't have to get into right now, but that really is one of the things that raised my concern as I read through it all, that just seemed like a lot of money going towards salaries. When, as Debbie mentioned, there wasn't a realtor on that list. There wasn't somebody who was out there in the community looking for the actual housing. So I share the concern of my fellow council members.
All right, Phil?
Same concerns expressed by Caroline, Letty, Debbie, and Mary Beth. My only reservation earlier about, taking more time with this was just my general reservation with taking more time. But I see in the NHP document under inventory, they're already anticipating that execution of the program will take longer than the 1 year, and the city will need to request an extension from the 12/31/23 deadline. So since we are already starting out with that expectation, I think it's very important to get it right at the front end. And certainly we need all the legal review we should have. And I just can't imagine that we're going to spend $32,000 per each of the 18 houses that we hope to buy on personnel costs alone. That just seems, I don't know, it just seems out of line.
Cindy?
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Mr. Duncan's point about the extension. The extension is an option if we're into the program and we haven't expended all the grant for purchases of home ownership. It wasn't intended from Virginia Housing's perspective that we don't start the program and then we ask for an extension. So I think there's a balance here where we need to get it right and do the deep dive, but we can't wait till into 2023 and then ask for the extension and if we haven't started the program. So I just wanted to put that bit of balance in there. Thank you.
That's helpful to know. That just increases the urgency that NHP come to the table with numbers that I think we're a little more comfortable with than we are now.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to lose the grant after our senator went to change the state code so that we'd be eligible for these Amazon grants, because prior to that we weren't. And then just, Dana mentioned at the very beginning, but this year two money has two components, the home ownership, which is indeed the biggest and the most complex, but there also is a rental covenant extension at the Reed Building, and that expires the end of this year. So our goal is also not to lose the grant funding and be able to do both the home ownership due to the high demand on the waiting list, but also not lose those rental units as well. So just a reminder of that second component. We haven't focused on it because the core concepts are there and it's not as complex. But
All right, thank you, Cindy. Other comments, questions? Carol, do you have knowledge, on it, not just legal knowledge, but do you have either ability to talk to others in the field about practices and what commercially reasonable terms are with respect to some of the aspects of this document?
I do have some, and I will do some more reaching out. I mean, I have heard concern about the 11% number, but I don't know if that is from a affordable housing type deal perspective. And so I need to do a little more work reaching out to find some people who have done this.
I think that would be helpful, just kind of getting I don't know if reality check's the right word, but just some kind of outreach as to some of the specific terms you've heard concerns about and others you haven't, that you just yourself in your review might find questionable or problematic.
Yeah.
Caroline?
Carol, I'm more than happy to introduce you to Emily Thadden at Grounded Solutions Network, who actually wrote the model documents and is in the legal profession. Grounded Solution Networks operates a network in the country of all program managers that run shared equity deals. Additionally, in Virginia, there are two. Oh, sorry, are you trying to say something? Because
No, I apologize.
And then there, additionally, there's two shared equity structures in running in Virginia. The first is Maggie Walker down in Richmond. So it's got 24 properties, 8 under development, and it also has Thomas Jefferson, which is now becoming Piedmont. That's got 8 houses and developing 4. So they have program managers in place. They've got these deals. One's been doing it since 2008. The other's been doing it 2016, but larger, and they have legal counsel involved.
All
Great.
right.
I will contact you in the morning and try to reach out to them tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments about this matter? All right, why don't we keep going here?
That is actually the conclusion of my presentation. So we've gone through all 3, and thank you for your feedback. Cindy, did you have anything to add?
I'm good.
All right, well, thank you and good luck, and you certainly have our best wishes and our congratulations. Let's move on now, if we can, to future consent items. Wyatt?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just note them briefly. We have our annual VRSA, our local government insurance pool insurance renewal. Cindy is our staff lead on that, if there are any questions on that. We have a request for approval of a license agreement with the Eden Center to move the bike share station, which is currently on Park Place, and to move it to the Eden Center. We have a VDOT resolution where the city will become the fiscal agent or the grant administrator for the Smart City, locally, the Smart City grant, which is the $10 million grant. There's a portion of that's been expended already by Virginia Tech, so the VDOT resolution calls out for just approximately 9.7 million is what the city will be administering going forward for that grant. And then we have 2 items for the library for their normal annual ebooks and book purchases. Happy to answer any questions.
Wyatt, let me ask you one about the Eden Center license agreement. So tell me a little bit more about that.
What specifically would you like to know?
No, was any money changing hands there?
No.
No.
Okay, and so who's paying for that?
This is, the
Thank you.
license agreement doesn't require the city to pay anything, but it just requires that the city, we can pay our facility there, and we would get some notice if they would like us to remove it. It shows the location that we can use to put a station there. And it's moving, and why you might be able more help with this, but it's moving a station that's right near, is it the State Theater, to a place which has a lot more traffic for bike share.
But so each station we pay, how much do we pay basically each station? How much do we subsidize each station? Approximately. I know the grant's come and gone, right?
That's correct. And
Yeah.
so I don't have that figure right in front of me. This currently is a very not well-used station. We think it will be better used when we move it back to this location at the on Park Place after the Whole Foods is open and the project is complete. Right now, because of the scarcity of parking, it is this all started as a request by the local businesses that station be moved so that those parking spaces can be used for takeout food pickup. And so we are trying to accommodate the businesses with that request by moving this station. We also think that ridership will improve. We've always wanted a station at the Eden Center, and so we think this is a good landing space for this station. Our hope is that the station will then stay at the Eden Center, and then we'll have an additional station, which will be paid for. The operating costs will be paid for when it's moved back to Park Place. That's one of the VCs that's offered by Insight.
So I guess where I was heading with all this is just to make sure that we have a model going forward that basically takes this out of the city's responsibility fiscally and onto developers where I think it belongs, particularly when you're talking about reducing parking below current requirements as part of a TDM. And I know we've done this at places, and some of them have numbers. You'll pay 20 grand a year, but we don't know what they'll cost. Maybe nobody rides them and it costs more. Maybe costs go up and it costs more. I guess, and I know I've spoken at this previously, but just when it comes up, it triggers me to mention once again that I think we're going to move to a business model where these bike share stations are really, quote, the responsibility of a developer who's putting in lots of new people and new cars. I think it's a super inexpensive and efficient way to get people out of cars, but I think it does benefit the developers. And so I think we ought to move away from the city basically cutting checks and getting some money back, a partial subsidy or whatever you might want to call it, reimbursement, to a model where the developers just pay the whole thing outright and not a fixed sum every year. And again, I know we've spoken about this, and hopefully we're moving more in that direction. But I think ultimately, next time Eden Center comes in for something, that may be something we want to seek from them as well, that they basically pay for their own station as part of their efforts to reduce parking requirements and the like. Okay, I'm going to take that as an enthusiastic yes.
It is, and I'll just say that is now essentially part of our standard VCs.
Okay. Letty?
Thanks. So agree with what Dave just said, but I guess tactically, once we move it to Eden Center, Insight finishes the Whole Foods project, are we moving it back then, you said, so that Eden Center will then lose the station they've had for a couple years?
No, the intent would be to have an expand the system so that the Eden Center would keep its station, and we would have a new station by the Whole Foods when that project is complete. And as the mayor noted, the Insight is responsible for covering, I think, $20,000 per year of the operating cost. So it's not exactly the way he described it, but there is that commitment to cover that amount, and it does increase with inflation.
Yeah, I would just say, like I said, going forward, just not a fixed amount, but whatever the cost is, that's your cost developer is what I would move to that model. I know we've had these numbers stuck in before. What's going to be? What's going to be? Look, here's what we think it's going to be, but it's your responsibility. I also think ultimately as well, like we're going to have these bike share locations that may be, quote, a bit remote. In other words, not really co-located with other ones. We need to make sure we got ways for people to get around. In other words, if you're at Eden Center, you're highly unlikely to be riding through 7 corners to go anywhere unless you want to get killed. But I think we need to make sure that we have proper paths for people to go on, because people probably will attempt to ride them places. And it seems like a bit of a recipe for disaster to have them in locations where it seems almost impossible to get out of there. For example, Eden Center. So I would just say that we should give some thought to, can we add some protected areas, at least in and around Eden Center, so somebody has somewhere to ride. Do you understand my point?
I certainly do, and that's always a key part of the positioning of those stations. And we think this actually is a good location. It is fairly close to the East Falls Church metro station, and so I think it actually will be quite a useful station.
Got it. Correct me, what do we have for bicyclists riding down Roosevelt to the East Falls Church metro station? Is there sharrows, or what is there?
It's actually a dedicated lane, I want to say. I've run on it before. It's not protected, but it's a dedicated lane.
Not
on
protected,
Roosevelt.
but there's a bike lane. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
It's one of the few dedicated lanes we have in the city.
Is it in the city or is that in Arlington?
It is from corner Sycamore and Roosevelt up to the Eden Center.
It was one of our CIP projects.
All right. Well, great. I'm glad everyone's thinking about it. Other comments about the consent agenda? Okay, so we do have a closed session tonight. Why don't we move on to that, unless there's anything before that anybody wants to say. So I'm going to read a motion to go into closed session. For those of you watching, it's unlikely we'll do anything substantive once we get out of closed session. Upon a motion made by council member
Leon?
Yes, Scott.
All right, let's do Leon. Seconded by council member
Yes, Scott.
Hiscott. And passed by a vote of City Council. Council went in a closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A3, acquisition of real property for a public purpose, where discussion would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of City Council, and Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1, discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body. Discussion of annual reviews for city manager, city clerk, and city attorney. Councilmember Conley?
Yes.
Duncan?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Leon?
Yes.
Hiscott?
Yes.
Snyder?
Yes.
Carter? Yep. The time is 8:43. How about we take a 7-minute recess while we get cameras down or whatever they need to do, and reconvene in closed session at 8:50? All right, let's do it.
And you will be going into a breakout room, thanks to Celeste, so that we'll be separate from the main meeting. And when we're in there and your time is set, then we can reconvene from there, Mayor.
All right, thanks, Celeste. Nice work. All right, see you on the other side.
Send you all in.
Okay, Mayor, FCC TV is back up.
All right, let's do a motion to come out of closed session formally. Upon a motion made by Councilmember
Scott.
Hardy and seconded by Councilmember
Scott.
and passed by a vote of City Council, council reconvening open session. Councilmember Conley,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Leon,
Yes.
Hiscott,
Yes.
Snyder,
Yes.
Carter, yep. Time is 11:07. This is our certification upon a motion made by Councilmember
Snyder.
and passed and seconded by Councilmember
Hardy.
and passed upon affirmative roll call vote in open session. It was certified that only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed session or meeting by the body. Councilmember Conley,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Leon,
Yes.
Hiscott,
Yes.
Snyder,
Yes.
Carter, yes. All right, is there anything else you want to say before we adjourn this meeting?
Is the Wednesday meeting virtual or in person?
Mayor's meeting?
Yes.
Virtual. Why not?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else anybody wants to say before we adjourn?
Good night.
Yeah, let's do it. That sounds good. All right, good night, everybody. We're adjourned.
Everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye.
thanks, council. Stay safe.
You.